This video covers 8 different research source types for your model railroad. Whether you do prototype, freelance, or anything in between. You can use, one or more. However, the more of these you use, the more realistic your model railroad can be. The first type is visiting the site of where your model railroad will be. Now, this is not, always possible, but if it is, if you have ability to get to where your layout is supposed to be set, it's really the best, because first you see the first-hand knowledge. The important caveat of visiting is to make sure that you do not trespass, whether on railroad right of way or in any private industrial areas. Do everything you can from public right of ways, roads, bridges, and places, parks, things like that, where you have access to. What you'll want to do is again take as many pictures, pictures of equipment, pictures of the right of way, pictures of industrial buildings, things in the streets. Especially if you're modeling things of the past, there's plenty of evidence that may be visible. Here are some pictures that I took when I was researching for my Produce Row subdivision layout, and these were taken about 25 or so years ago. Here's an example of some of the evidence that you could see. One of the spots on the layout, somewhat modeled under my current T-Trax layout setup, is the Spokane, Portland, Seattle Railroad. That line that crosses over the Union Pacific and Southern Pacific tracks. Here is what we see here is the SP&S line. Then you can see here is the Union Pacific line that crosses here, and also you can see these old track in the pavement, which gives you an idea what happened with crossings. Here there was a switch here. There's this original plate that covers the switch mechanism. And you see here is a building here that's built across the tracks. It's a recent plug. You can see the difference between the old and the new concrete. So it's evidence where a track used to go. The other example is like here, this is the same on the other side of the same structure. You can see this is a curving spur. You can see where the track used to go between these two buildings. That gives evidence that there was, actual tracks there at one time. Another example here, we're in the street again on 2nd Street in East Portland. You see the old tracks. You can see where loading docks used to be, where loading docks are. As an example. Another example is here, facing at a road crossing here, crossing the Southern Pacific main line at the time. You can see here's old loading docks, right. Loading doors, and there used to be 4 tracks here at one time, spurs on both sides. So there is plenty evidence you get of past activity, and of course what currently things are, the details of trash and things like that, so that you can use this for modeling current day or the past as an example. The second source is the internet. So this offers a variety of sources, and there is more and more available from the net at any given time. Here's some stuff here that I pulled out, and this was again a long time ago, and stuff I've kept around. For instance, I was looking for I need to model a freighter of the period. So if we found some pictures here of a similar kind of freighters, here are colors and things like that, as an example, potential names, things like this. So here's one example. One here, pardon the water damage here, but this was a Oregon Department of Environmental Quality report on some of the big gas holder storage tanks that are on the layout. So I found there are a lot of details on size and other equipment and things like that on the pads themselves. Another thing I picked up here just on the net here is another Here's examples of as spoken Portland, Seattle special instructions to go with their timetables. This was stuff here, which again available on the net, and I didn't have to go anywhere to to get it. Another opportunity is historic pictures. There are plenty of more and more historic pictures available on the net, historic photo resources that before you had to go and maybe find in libraries and things like that. You can actually obtain that stuff today. So here's an example of an aerial shot, more than likely taken in the early 1950s, that was used for planning for the I-5 freeway up East Portland. You notice it's right here, right now, though it doesn't exist in this picture. And along with this, with historical videos, there's plenty of railroad rail fanning videos on the net now for old past remastered old Super 8 and VHS tapes, as well as stuff that other current channel creators are putting out there. Another option here is obviously you can use Google Earth or Google Maps. You can see what things look like from the ground today. Especially good for industrial areas you can't get into personally. The third source are historical societies. I joined the Oregon Historical Society for a couple of years in the early 2000s in order to access their research laboratory. This particular picture here, which I've shown before, is actually out of that research library. Their files. And here's like another one that was taken. This is actually a start of construction of the original I-84 or I-80, Interstate 80 North at the time. So you got the original bridges you can see in here, but see that we're I-5. They've just started some clearing in here, but they haven't really started much construction at this point. So this is again that early mid to late 50s here. This sample, but you can still see buildings and things like that you might be modeling. You get the different ideas. The advantage of these were out of the research, the libraries, and I just basically took copies of them. One of the big advantages of research of historical societies are these Sanborn maps, and these are Sanborn fire insurance maps that were generally here. They were, for instance, the Oregon Historical Society has stuff here all the way back from 1879 for Portland up through about 1965, and they have a number of other cities like in Oregon too. Other sources would have these for other states. In a Sanborn fire insurance map, and here's an example of them here. The advantage of these is they will show and frequently, like for instance, here's those gas holders we talked about. So here's gas holders. It gives approximately in the size. Here's the company, so Portland Gas and Coke Company. So we have a name, we have size. These things are to scale. Sometimes you also show other buildings in here, like they'll tell you the type of like this is a composite warehouse here with a concrete floor as an example. Here, another structure here. This is the Ford building. Now the Oregon Liquor Control Commission building on the layout. You've seen it. It was featured prominently in my Exploring the Possibilities video on the different eras, and you'll see it as far as the Produce Row series go. But here's the original footprint of this, and eventually these show the tracks. You can see the tracks. Here's some misalignment here because they do cut and pasting over the years, but we can see here SP railroad here and the different track arrangements at the time. So you can see different details of this. This also includes buildings, street names, street widths, things like that can all be taken from a Sanborn map. So these are really valuable for your one laying out structures on your layout. The fourth type are employee timetables and special instructions. These are different from your typical timetables you might write for Amtrak or something. These are for the employees. And the advantage of these, like here's one here for the Northern Pacific here from January '53. So These are really a great find. You can find these at train shows, things like that. And ideally, if you can find them close to around you can find them by the railroad, your divisions, and then ideally, if you can find something close to your time frame, is great. One advantage of these is that they will show, as example here, all the different trains. And these are all the different these are the pool trains. A lot of these that ran between Portland and Seattle, as example. So we have all of the stations in here, mile points, and all the whole schedules of these of these trains here. And they have first class and second class trains. A lot of these are beginning for were employees. So basically, a lot of times they can stay if you're doing an extra, you can stay out of the way of a scheduled train. And then there's also a lot of times there's a lot of details in the back. Here's an example here showing where all the locations of crossovers are between the main lines, where you have double track main lines. Here's an example here of all where commercial spurs and capacities are, and again, right down with industrial names as an example. So again, can be very powerful. And in the back here, railroad crossings, interlockings, and drawbridge locations. So if you're doing specific areas, that can be very powerful to have. Similar to that are the special instructions. These again are special instructions for the employees. So you can see here as example, here's for the Bellingham branch. These are a lot of typical. There's it tells what the speed restrictions, engine restrictions, car restrictions, derails, crossovers. There's locations of Ys, clearances, as an example. And here, so there's lots of information. So a lot of rules, references, mostly a lot of operations on switches and signals and things. Here's a little newer one from the Southern Pacific, Oregon Division, 1984. Similar kind of information. And we can see that we have mile points, but there's also where, Ys exist, passing sidings exist, speeds, passenger and freight speeds. The stuff in there again. There's information in here, like here, of placards for tank cars, hazardous material instructions, hot box detectors, scanner locations, signal lokes, brake operations. Speed limits, things. We have a whole series in here of vertical profiles here for all the different branches. As an example, system maps. So there's a treasure trove of information. So there's one thing you can look at the timetables or these special instructions will give you a pile of information. The fifth type are rule books. And these here, again, is a good, just a train show kind of a thing. These were assigned to different staff employees of the railroad. These are all all of the rules that they all had to know, and then for reference. So a lot of these will cover things like train orders in different locations, specific rules of switches and signals, and and a lot of these are usable through many different ways. You can look at it for operations. You want to do prototype operations, but you can also use these to check out for different signals and ops and how you run. So you would know, for instance, if railroads ran on the left side or they ran on the right, different practices, and sometimes you may not necessarily. This book is from 1969. I found a lot of the rules here in 1984. The rules were still a lot of the rules in the 69 book were in this 84 timetable or instructions. I have special instructions from 1955, and they were also in here from 1969. So a lot of these, you have one rule book for generally in your period. You should be able to find there'll be a lot of uses, whether this other kind of information that references it is the same time. The sixth type I would say, is more of this range of other material. Sometimes it can be things like this. These are actually, postcards of the Milwaukee Road. Here's the Milwaukee, high period postcard from the Hiawatha. Here's a newer one here. Showing different motive power and scenery and things like that. So these can be used as reference photographs. Sometimes you can pick up. There's different ephemera, for instance, from from operating departments or station masters, train order sheets. A lot of stuff can be picked up for relatively cheap because it's just paperwork. A lot of people aren't interested in it, and you can usually pick up a big pile of it for not very much. The seventh source are railroad historical societies. For me right now, I belong to the Southern Pacific Historical and Technical Society and the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association, because it covers, again, my particular interests. So these both put out a very, very nice magazine, which covers pictures, routes, stories, locomotives, equipment, operations, train wrecks, things like that. So anything you potentially could need, and maybe it's not necessarily always in your area of interest, your locale, but these are things we'll cover. A lot of these will cover, system wide. These also organizations like this will put out different items, like the North Pacific Group puts out a great calendar every year. So these, again, works great for reference photos. And again, like with these reference photos, as an example, you can cover, here's a GP9 here, torpedo tube GP9 here in Olympia, but you also note some for it's pulling a Western Maryland and a Rio Grande boxcar as example. So you can get a lot of the car types, car roads, what the scenery look like around it as an example. So you can pull a lot of information here from things like this. Other societies, like the Southern Pacific Society, has put together a whole mess of books together. Here is the volume 1 on coaches and chair cars for the Southern Pacific. They've also done books on sleeping cars, head-in cars, diners, lounges, dome cars, the business cars, and maintenance of way equipment. So these are like these passenger car books are really good because they got pictures, details on specific cars, whole mess of inside pictures, outside pictures, rosters, names, car names, dispositions, so you can get an idea of what the cars look like inside and out. So these are, again, extremely, extremely valuable. Of course, these do cost some dollars for these, but again, you can have them and find them. They're, again, invaluable sources for your layout. The eighth and final source is our books. Books are things that are always available at train shows, bookstores you might find, and other places. These are always great resources. So it's always nice to pick things up. And a lot of times for your railroad, there's plenty of material out here. For instance, there's been for Southern Pacific, there's been a source of Southern Pacific freight car books and covering all the different classes of SP freight cars. And the advantage of these guys, as example here, are these are reference pictures I used to create the hog fuel cars for my 1955 layout, because this gives everything: pictures, side views, end views, close-ups, information on car numbers, dispositions, car types, and gave me the information I needed to figure out how to model these properly. Also, it's common to find, if you can find color guides. Here's a color guide for the NP example. These will give, like here again, car, specific like box cars here, the different car series, sample pictures. Again, you can get an idea. Give some of the pictures, even of the car. You can get pictures of the other freight cars in the yards here. Again, scenery, weathering, good weathering ideas. An example for some of these cars. I mean, these are generally available, have been available for a lot of different railroads. They're also good for. We also get these for locomotives. Here's the Southern Pacific Review series here that were done in the 70s and 80s. This is covering different classes and features of different Southern Pacific locomotives, diesels, for example, and again with rosters and things like that. So again, very nice to have. And there's also information like this available for the past. Here's the one on the Southern Pacific, Alco PAs. We also have, there are a lot of times there are books available, like here's on Southern Pacific Mountains. And I also have books on the GS4 daylights and the cab forwards here as well. So a lot of times you can find an assortment of, equipment that falls that in locomotives that you want and need. Lastly, here, there are plenty of books like these color pictorial books, usually in multiple volumes. Again, these are great source pictures again for locomotives, equipment, scenery, things like that. So if you want to do, here's South Central Montana, here's a good idea what South Central Montana looks like, especially if you can't get there, or especially of example. Don't forget books here on routes. Here I tended to, here's a book on the crossing of the Southern Pacific in Santa Fe over the Tehachapi Mountains. I also have books of SP's Salt Lake Division, the Shasta Division, over railroads over Donner Pass. So, and a lot of times, if you pick up routes, things like that are that feed into the area where you're modeling, again, that can actually help, because that these trains you're seeing on your trains you're seeing here would eventually come across your division. So again, you get a really great idea, and you get a lot of interesting history and reading, and not to mention all the great pictures. So again, with all this kind of information, you can gather a lot. And the more you can gather and put things together, you can make your layout the most realistic that it can be.